Hi, friends. Welcome again to another episode of Beyond the Clouds Edge to Edge Transformation. I got to know Ashish because of the series of AI related topics that he and Tushar and others have been exploring and helping us understand what's going on. Even people who work in this domain find it complex that we have to use peer learning and learn with each other. Just tell us about you. What was your journey like?
Thank you for having me, Shankar. My dad was a professor at mechanical engineering in one of the IITs. He was fairly forward looking. He got me a computer when I was in grade five, a computer called a ZX Spectrum, which was the UK version of the Commodore. It was like a keyboard and it had the memory and CPU inside the keyboard. You could connect it to a TV, you could play games, and the way you stored data was on an audio cassette, which sounded really funny when you played it back. But you connected the audio cassette and then you wrote programs in it. Came with a small book which had a bunch of games like tic-tac-toe and others that you could program yourself. You just had to key them in. That was my introduction to programming. At that time, BBC micros were bought by the Indian government and being supplied to schools. So I was the beneficiary of the policy to try to get computing in. And it was nice because I had just done a little bit of basic at home. So it's not that foreign in school. I consequently did well because I knew what they were going to do in the first place. I really enjoy to program. I really enjoy learning technical topics. I was told that there is a profession where you get paid to do what you enjoy. That tickled me to no end because very soon me and my good friend Rohit, we became the tech support for a bunch of people when we were still in high school. We were doing for free. We enjoyed repairing computers, installing software and stuff like that. Our parents told us that if you get through this thing called the IIT, then you can do this for a living. 4 years of engineering was tough enough. I had enough formal education. At my heart, I'm an engineer. Got a job, worked for several years, worked in telecom, worked in consulting, where I worked in many different industries in many different countries. I've worked in Brazil, I've worked in England, I've worked in Canada and US, obviously India as well. My journey took me to London as one of the first places I worked at. Lots of interesting things to note and see there. Then worked in San Francisco, Toronto, and then out of these three cities, which are all very good cities, I found that I connected with Toronto the most and ended up moving there, lived there for about 10 years and then moved to the Bay Area. When I started, there was no real machine learning per se or deep learning at that time. It was more statistics. I was doing more work in data warehousing, data modeling. I worked in Hadoop, one of the early versions. And one of the questions that I had in my mind was, what will we do with it? The colleague introduced me to Kaggle in 2011. Kaggle was just coming out. I got together with another colleague of mine, Adrian, in Toronto. We formed a small team and we entered one of the first competitions for Best Buy. We won an Xbox and an iPad. Again, this is like the you can get paid for this stuff kind of moment. I felt like I need to learn. And Rohing had a small talk that I heard where he said, you don't have a PhD, it's okay if you read a paper a week, spend 2 hours a week continuously over time, you will be as good as a PhD in a couple of years. So I literally took that to heart. I'm still reading those papers. The field is so rapidly evolving. So my stack of papers is a fairly thick stack. It is still growing, but I'm trying to keep up.
That's quite a journey. And so looks like you found your ikigai when you were still in high school, fixing computers and software. Did you go from one field of interest to another naturally? What was your focus when you were changing from telecom to data warehousing to where you are today?
There is a difference between the tools or the skills that we have and the applications of those tools and skills. In some ways, I have evolved in both directions. The tools of the trade were, let's say, C++ and SQL or different programming languages. They have changed to PyTorch, TensorFlow, and LLMs or pre-trained models. The applications of those are numerous. So whether I apply those tools in telecom, where I'm writing almost like RTOS level code for a call simulator, or I'm doing a recommendation system for a fast fashion retailer, that's the application side of it. This is a key distinction between an engineer and a scientist. I am an engineer because I like to apply stuff. I don't learn stuff for the pure joy of learning. I learn stuff to apply it and solve some problem with it. That's what I enjoy doing. And I've been fairly fortunate that I've applied. I have a lot of experience because I've worked in consulting for a long time. So I've worked for mutual funds, for women's fast fashion, for mining companies, a very wide variety of places and locations and industries.
What is the best way to learn when technology is moving so fast?
Everybody has a desire to learn without putting in the effort to learn. Everybody wishes they would learn. Everybody has the same 24 hours in the day. And what you prioritize. For example, I have the desire to exercise, but I don't exercise. So I want to exercise. I understand the reasons why one must exercise. I know I will be more healthy, but do I do it on an everyday basis? And the passion part of it. But I would spend an extra 2 hours reading a paper at night. Logically, I am unable to explain my behavior when I reflect on it. If I were stuck with a programming problem, I'm happy to put 3 hours and work on it till 3 a.m., but I'm not willing to go to the gym at 1 a.m., even though I have a 24-hour gym. So there is some prioritization internally where I am more motivated towards one. Both are hard, right? Exercising is not easy because otherwise it won't be exercise. Exercising your brain is not easy because you're forced to read something. And then try to learn that much that you need to solve that problem. And then see if you want to learn a little more to improve the solution that you have built. I've never read a book on technology cover to cover. If I have a problem, I want to find the solution to it. Then it becomes much more useful. You also don't retain what you don't do. You could learn or read through a set of papers. At that time, they may seem very obvious to you, but when you go and apply, you're like, I don't know, how do I get started? For example, let's take any machine learning paper. Can you implement that paper in code? Most people won't be able to because the paper itself doesn't have enough inside it, right? So many are now putting GitHub links in their papers. So when I get this paper, I go to GitHub. I have a mental block with math. I'm not great with math. When I see equations, they start dancing in my head. If the same thing is represented in code, it is very easy for me. For me, my brain works with code. Figure out what works for you. For some people, equations work. Equations are very easy for them. For me, Greek symbols, I don't understand the standard meanings of phi, theta, delta. I barely got through all of that in school. I'd rather just have a piece of code. That is okay for me. The other part is figure out what works for you in your learning style.
The panels you put together is a fantastic way to learn. With newer things coming up with AI and with large language models and maybe smaller language models in future, do you think the whole learning process is going to go through a transformation?
People's attitudes are changing. Some of what we are seeing with these models and their popularity is a consequence of society's desire for certain things. If you went back 20 years, 1 hour lecture was not a big deal. I remember like you could sit through it. Today, sitting through a 1 hour lecture is really, really hard, especially if it is online. Like imagine yourself sitting in front of your TV, completely engrossed in watching a lecture on physics for an hour on YouTube. Invariably, I see people reaching out for their second screens like phones and like quickly checking messages. People's attention spans have reduced and they're also trying to get a little more instant gratification. I have this instant question, I want the answer, to tell me everything around it. That's a trend that LLMs capture very well. When you have a query, they can give you everything you need to know about the query. Can you compare these two televisions for me? Can you plan a 3-day itinerary for me in France? Like, don't tell me all the history and the geography and why this is like, just I trust you. It's okay. Just give me an itinerary, and maybe the itinerary is 80% okay, and maybe I'll make a few adjustments. But like, it got my job done. That's the big value of what I'm seeing with some of these. It's just a reflection of society because many of those models existed even before, but they never got the same popularity. So in technology, timing is very important. You can have a groundbreaking idea, but if it's ahead of its time, you will not see adoption. This is an example of something that the complexity in the world has increased enough that search is maybe not enough for many of these types of questions that people have. And they're also not sure, like when I do a search, I might see 10 search results. I am not sure which one to pick. If somebody could summarize it for me, life becomes much easier. So it's also a way for us to deal with complexity in our world, which is constantly growing.
I see that you've always kept up with technology from the days when you were in school. What are the most interesting emerging technologies that you are excited by and why?
There are two areas. One is an application area and one is a technology area. Everybody is talking about the AI revolution in the same way they would talk about the industrial revolution or the agricultural revolution. Both of these revolutions had some negative consequences to people of skill at that time. In the industrial revolution, you had a bunch of these craftsmen. They were replaced by these machines who would mass produce goods. On an average, the quality of the mass produced goods was inferior to the ones that were being produced by the craftspeople. However, it was much easier to generate massive amounts and supply the demand. My family tells me story of this Dhaka muslin cloth, which was very famous, which you could pass through a small ring. That cloth is not made anymore. We've all heard of the Damascus knives. No, nobody really knows how to make the Damascus knives, but we know how to make a million knives very quickly of sufficiently high quality steel. Maybe not the Damascus one. In the future, if we are going to have more revolutions, we need to do better at taking everybody with us. I feel that education and retooling is an opportunity for us in society. This time, when we have an AI revolution, let's have it in a way that whoever work it is replacing or doing better, we can retrain them and empower them to do something else much faster and more scalable. If there is one thing that technology is good at, it is scaling. On the technology front in the future, I'm really excited about the combo of AI and robotics. My standing joke is that I wish somebody would invent a robot that would iron my clothes and wash my dishes because I hate doing these two things. The robotic controls have been a challenge. The environment in which a robot is operating inside a home is not a controlled environment, unlike industrial robotics. Exactly where the robot is and where the supply line is and what would come on that belt, you can do hard code programming, but you cannot do that hard coding. And there's millions of instructions that you have to give. If you have 3 degrees of freedom in an arm, you have to rotate and move it up and down and grasp something. So it's not a trivial problem. A lot of people are working on it, but I'm excited about everyday robotics, which can have a transformational impact for the elderly, for the less privileged, and for the people who may have some disabilities.
Ashish, I truly appreciate that you talked about democratization and making technology more inclusive, making it available to a lot of people. Is that really happening? Or are we at risk that people who can't afford it will give away all their information and lose privacy? Or what about the ethical issues? What about the bias issues?
I'm generally very optimistic about technology. On the balance, technology has been good for the people. One could argue that the dark web exists, hence the internet should be highly regulated. There are people who have used cars and trucks and planes to commit terrorist acts as well. So the question is that is it necessarily a problem of the technology, or is it a regulation of the technology or a regulation of the users of the technology? Radiation can be used for killing cancer, generating power, and also destroying lives. We must have some perspective. If you wanted to make a computer do your bidding, how do you do that? Essentially, no real change has happened in human computer interaction for decades. We still have a mouse and we still have a keyboard. And we still have a menu system which has a few words that you can click around and then you get some results. Is that democratized for people? Let's say that I give somebody MS Word. Is it easy for them to use MS Word for the first time? It does have a learning curve if they want to write a document. If I give, let's say, Photoshop to an artist and say, yeah, you can draw in here, and they were a physical artist, would they find it easy to paint on Photoshop? My mom's a painter. She started learning Photoshop when she was 65 and retired after several decades of teaching. And it has been incredibly difficult for her to control. Like you need a Wacom tablet, and then even though the pressure things don't work, the reason I'm making these analogies is that we sometimes lose perspective that technology is hard to use for everybody on a day-to-day basis. And it's nothing specific about AI. We have not done enough to make people easy to make use technology. I would argue that a chat-based interface using natural language is transformational. Now, I can just talk to a computer and have it do things. We are seeing these examples where people are generating images. Let us assume that speech to text is a solved problem. For most intents and purposes in English, it is a solved problem. So whether I'm typing a prompt or I'm speaking a prompt, It's arguably the same thing. And if I can say, hey, start drawing this and then enhance this portion of the image and do this and do this, then I can give more access to people. We have been thinking about the digital divide. And in the US, there's maybe 40, 60 million homes who don't have access to internet. I was just thinking about this last night. We sometimes go about it the wrong way. So our solution is Starlink. We will have Starlink, and Starlink will give you broadband access. But think about Starlink for a second. How much does it take to get you internet if you use Starlink? You need a dish, you need some receiver box, then you need a Wi-Fi router, and then you need a device to connect to use the internet. So you need at least 4 devices. You need somebody to like put the dish in the right spot and so on. And you need to then install all of this and set up a Wi-Fi code and all of that. Is that easy for people? Like, and that's pretty expensive because the Starlink box is like 399 or something. So it's not cheap either. We are ignoring the potential of mobile phones. The world has a very high penetration of mobile phones, which all have data. At least 3G, my understanding is very widely available. So in that case, your transmitter and your Wi-Fi box are all already in the device. So it's one place where you have all of this. So we should think about how we can make access to internet and access to digital tools more pervasive from that single device, as opposed to I need a computer and a monitor. Yeah, we are in a first world country in America. So yes, we can go to Best Buy and buy a computer, and we can go to Costco and get all of these things for us. But that's not true for everybody in the world. But what they do have is some sort of an Android phone, which may have some internet access to it. They can text people. Once they can text people, I can bring AI to them in ChatGPT for like in a chat format. So I don't need very complicated interfaces. We are missing this idea that people can interact with technology with a very unsophisticated interface, chat now.
Simplicity is what really brings things to people more easily, and democratization has happened. You don't have to go to mainframes or minis or workstations or PCs now. You can do it on a phone. Our perspective, our relationship with these devices is changing, our relationship with each other. In what ways have you changed over these years? Are you the same kid who went in search of interesting technology? Have your perspectives shifted over the last few decades as you got more and more into emerging technologies?
I am quite certain my perspective has changed, and I'm quite certain it will keep changing. Those two things I am certain of. What I'm less certain of is how have they changed over the years. From my own vantage point, the change happens very slowly. It's like relativistic motion. I'm inside the car that is moving, so I feel like I'm static. But so my entire frame is moving with me. So I don't feel that sense of motion. I would have to do more introspection to note down some of those things. So far, I've been happy to just go on this journey of change and observing things. I have seen just how difficult it was to get access to a computer when I was growing up. I was really fortunate that we had a small, even if it just ran basic programming language, was still like amazing. My first computer had 128 kilobytes of RAM. I was amazed. And there was a time where I had a 360 kilobyte floppy disk, which could contain the operating system, my documents, and a few games. An empty Word document now is 60 kilobytes. I've seen some change. I remember you had to go to somebody's home, like one person in the neighborhood had a phone and people would arrange where to get calls and things like that done. I've seen a lot of this change and how easy things have become now. So that is part of what my perspective. While we acknowledge that there is a lot to be done, we should not forget how much we have come along as well.
Yes, I agree with you. The world has changed in many different ways. The rate of change seems to be accelerating every day, and people are feeling left behind.
Yeah.
What advice do you have about how to approach the whole problem of technology from a career perspective, from a life perspective?
The popular depiction of technology probably needs to change. We need to think about that. I was at the Pan IIT Summit. The sessions were all represented with a cyborg head, almost in the Terminator style. And having somebody who works in this, it is more like racks and racks of 2U, 4U servers, which occupy like a data center that consumes like 500 megawatts of power. It is nothing like a cyborg with a humanoid form factor. The public perception of technology is different. We have always, as in society, struggled with technology and feeling not happy about using technology. I still know many people who are very proud of the fact that they don't use technology. They're like, oh, I don't use that. I can do it myself. Or even today, some of the older people I've met, they're like, I can compute that in my head. We need to really think about our attitude towards technology. Humans have been building technology from the Stone Age to simplify their lives. We used to make small flint stones and we used to get sharp stones and tie them to the top of these spears or sticks so that we could hunt animals. Now, would anybody at that time say, oh, I don't use technology. I'm going to kill this animal with my bare hands. I'm a real person. I'm a real caveman. That doesn't happen. We need to start accepting that technology is part of our lives. I think life becomes much simpler after that. You asked me another question about learning. And I said, like, you have to want to learn. There's an old proverb also, which is, you cannot fill a filled pot. If you want to learn, you must have to first empty yourself. Then only something can go in. If you believe that you already know everything and everything was better in the older days and everything was great and it's just a downhill, then it's very hard to learn. That is the growth mindset almost that one must apply. After that, a lot of these things are easy. Not everybody is going to become a programmer. Not everybody is going to become like a young Jeffrey Hinton. And I don't think that we all need to be. Similarly, not everybody is going to become a Nobel laureate. We just need to know enough so that we can use it responsibly and to our own needs and make our lives easier. Everybody now knows how to use a microwave and an air fryer and a refrigerator and a television. And these are all technical items. And the modern TVs are not simple. There are like 60 buttons that you could press, and people are able to do it. Maybe there is something to be said about our interfaces and how easy or difficult do we make them. And I don't think we make computers easy to use. We make TVs easy to use. We make microwaves easy to use. It's like 6 buttons, and then you press them and exactly what they do all the time. But maybe that's what we need to do, and that's what AI can maybe power for us and hide some of that complexity.
Technology is pervasive, as you said, whether it's microwave, TV, air fryer, heating systems, cooling systems, cars, and all that. But one of the challenges I find is that it's like an always on culture, work all through the night, be on the internet. How do you personally find that balance between being absorbed into these gadgets and being in nature?
The balance, I guess, is hard. I spend a lot of time with people. Over time, I've started to be more protective of my vacation time. 10 years ago, when my family was still very young, it was very hard because I was still in the early phases of my career and it took a fairly long amount of time to do work and stuff. Now, work still happens, but I also have the means to take a trip to Hawaii and go hiking, which I did not have before. I could only drive within drivable distances. And setting responsible limits for how much you'd use technology on your own. It's really hard. COVID has really changed the balance, at least for my kids. Before that, I had screen time limits, but after during the COVID time, because everything became online, it all went downhill because everything had to be done online. And now I'm seeing more and more homework coming online. So it's really hard to know when my son is doing homework or playing a game on his computer. So there's some challenges. So there are challenges we all need to do, but we have to work through it and set up reasonable limits for all of us. The important thing here is to not forget the need for human connection. What technology does today is instead of you having 10 close friends, now you have 100 social friends on Facebook and other. We have a societal need to be around people. Now, how we fulfill that need is either through one of the sessions, Shankar, that you met me at, is an in-person way of doing that. Or what we are doing right now is through a virtual way of meeting and talking. And both are okay as long as they are kept in balance. And that's why as soon as COVID was over for the IIT AIML forum, we immediately brought back events that were in person. It's harder, it takes more effort to organize. Part of the view of organizing one of these events is that people get to meet in person. And it is, I would say that Zoom communication or online video calls, I call them low bandwidth communication because a lot of the communication is nonverbal. It's in your body language. You don't know what I'm wearing. Am I really serious? Maybe I'm in my pajamas. We can't really have eye contact on Zoom. It's really hard because I'm looking at the screen and the camera is different than it. So you don't really have that. It's very easy to get distracted. So many of these high bandwidth communication aspects happen only in person. So I feel like there must be a balance of these. And as soon as you get into in personal meetings, then technology all automatically takes the right role, where you pull out your phone to contact, to feed each other's phone number or connect on LinkedIn, and then you look, okay, at least I have your information. So technology is still important there, because otherwise you would not be able to keep in touch with that person or remember, or you take a selfie to, these things would not have happened without technology and progress before. Now, as soon as events are over, people post on LinkedIn or someplace or Facebook and something, hey, we met this, we sent on your WhatsApp group, hey, I met Shankar after 20 years. That's the balance that we can strike.
Thank you for these different perspectives. And this is why I talk to people. We want to do things that are most meaningful to us, the way you found your ikigai. And all power to you and to people out there. I'm looking for different perspectives, different ways of looking at it, and how we can co create a future that we will live with, will enjoy, and not just a system that will just make a lot of money for some people, but how can we create technology that's really harmonizing us to have a more meaningful life? Thanks again, Ashish.
Thank you so much for having me, Shankar.